Hi, welcome to the Sri Lankan Understanding Season 2. New face this time around. My name is Amrit Rajaratnam. I'm an attorney at law by profession, but I will attempt to understand Sri Lanka the way that I've understood this beautiful country of mine. Today we have a very special guest, Amrit Rajaratnam, the Managing Director of Maitland Knox and Resorts. They are the proud owners of Sigiriya Village, Club Palm-Bay Maravilla, Thotalagala, Golf Fort Hotel, which has rope walk bar, and very recently Warden's House. It encompasses a plethora of different tourism sectors. So today we thought we will discuss a very pertinent issue, that is tourism in Sri Lanka. We keep saying that it is an important sector, that it is the most important sector, that we have so many tourists coming in. But is it actually contributing towards the GDP of Sri Lanka? Are we getting the money that we are supposed to be getting? Are we getting the type of tourists that we should be getting? Those are the kind of questions that we want to go ahead and ask with Amrit. Amrit, welcome to the Sri Lankan Understanding. Thank you for agreeing to be with us today. How are you today?
I'm very well. My pleasure being here. And I hope I can contribute some insight into the questions that you have.
Amrit, a little known fact, you are also a barrister at law. And so what made you want to get into the tourism industry?
Yeah, I am a barrister at law, but I think my passion was always hospitality and tourism. So after completing my studies, when I returned to Sri Lanka, I think it was a natural sort of fit for me to go into hospitality, and that's really it. I've been in the industry now for, well, almost 20 years. So yeah, that was really the reason.
So before you came back to the country, I mean your company had, I believe, Club Palm-Bay, Maravilla, the Palms, Sigiriya Village. Those were already established.
Yeah, they were
resorts.
Established resorts, and they've been around for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
It's the case of Sigiriya Village, over 40 years.
Yeah.
And then what really started after I sort of went into hospitality was the boutique properties, which is the Golf Fort Hotel and Thotalagala. Actually, the companies are two different ones. One is Fort Resorts,
yes,
and Maitland Knox is the boutique hotel company.
So I asked this because your establishment of the boutique hotels also coincided with Sri Lanka moving into a different type of tourism, because we were mainly beach resorts and or cultural, hotels in the cultural areas. So what kind of movement have you seen the past few years, moving from that kind of tourism to boutique resorts?
Well, actually, if you look at historically, the beach holiday in Sri Lanka was our sort of number one product. I think it's what sold the most. And the cultural triangle as well. Areas like Sigiriya, Dambulla, Polonnaruwa, they were also quite well established, as well as Kandy, and to a certain extent Norelia. Those were, I think way before our time, if you look at the late 70s up to 1982, which is considered sort of a high watermark historically in Sri Lankan tourism, that those are the areas that were doing well, as well as the East Coast, which was also very popular.
We forget that most of the time, that
Exactly.
the East Coast was actually one of the most,
correct. And then obviously we had 1983, which led to a tremendous downturn in the tourism sector in Sri Lanka, and then subsequently we had other problems, and obviously with the war that was in the country. So I think for a lot of Sri Lanka's history, especially in our lifetimes, the tourism sector had to deal with the main problem was the war. And then obviously in 2008 the war ended, and then we had a resurgence in the tourism sector. I think if you ask me why did I look at the boutique sector, I think it was when we were coming out of the war. I think at that time Europe went through a recession, and although Sri Lanka as a destination was set to expand rapidly, the demand for sort of long haul holidays at that time around 2008, 2009 took a little bit of hit purely because of the economic crisis globally. And so what we saw was a suppression in demand for certainly some of our resort properties, whereas Sri Lanka became known along that time for its excellent boutique hotels, smaller hotels that were possibly more design and experience driven rather than your standard larger resort style hotels.
So people wanted to move into this more private, exclusive kind of experience.
Yes, essentially, I mean, lots of people, and correctly so, equate the boutique experience to a luxury experience.
Okay.
And one aspect, if you say, of the luxury experience is exclusivity, it's privacy. Those are, I guess, more evident in a boutique hotel rather than a traditional large resort. With that also comes a higher price tag, usually. And business-wise, that wasn't the only reason, but it was sort of also to do with boutique hotels in their nature are smaller, and they also have a less impact on the destination as a whole. For example, somewhere like Golf Fort, we have 11 rooms. It's quite sustainable. It's a better return on investment as well as it's something that I genuinely enjoyed with the sort of designing an experience for a traveler rather than sort of commoditizing and selling a hotel room.
Right. So in the Sri Lankan context, you touched on 2008 after the war ended, but we didn't. Now there is a lag, isn't there? In any tourism, there is a lag between some event and we had a civil war for 20 odd years. Then the war ended, and from that lag, how long, in your estimation, did it take for Sri Lanka to recover and touch base with the rest of the region, at least, not the world, rest of the region, in terms of getting the numbers back in?
I think after 2008, there was sustained growth. You can't deny that year on year there was tremendous growth in the numbers that came in Sri Lanka. But I think if I can preempt you, your follow-up question is, what relation is there to tourist arrival numbers and actual inflow of, let's say, US dollars or whatever into the destination? A lot of people don't understand is that, what people don't understand is that even as a hotelier, we are not only competing with other brands and other local companies or even multinational brands, but Sri Lanka first and foremost competes as a destination with Thailand, with Malaysia, with the Maldives certainly, with a lot of regional players. And I think for the longest time, one of the challenges that Sri Lanka faced was, what are we as a destination? Are we a budget destination? Are we a luxury destination? Are we, that
is and that is something I want to explore. We will go into a short commercial break, and when we come, we will continue with this interesting conversation. It's very pertinent for us to understand what is Sri Lanka at this moment. What do we want to do? Welcome back. As we were discussing, we came to a very pertinent point in our conversation as to what kind of product is Sri Lanka. What is Sri Lanka? What does Sri Lanka entail when somebody around the world discusses what Sri Lanka is? Now, for instance, when we travel to Europe or US or South America, when you say Sri Lanka, they think we are an exotic destination. How does that correlate with what your experience is in the numbers that come to Sri Lanka?
So I think for too long there's been this focus on, let's hit a certain number of tourists that come into Sri Lanka. So for the longest time, I think initially we tried to get to 1 million tourists, then we've tried to get to 1.5 million, 2 million, 2.5 million. Whilst that's all well and good, the focus purely on the number of tourists, for me, is incorrect, and we should never have focused on purely a number. What I feel at the end of the war, what a lot of people did, and there were several studies published, is Sri Lanka should specialize, and because we are quite a small destination,
Yes.
and perhaps we didn't have the infrastructure at that time, we should perhaps look at less impactful tourism, but at the same time, a low volume and high yield, which is essentially, okay, what is our carrying capacity for tourism? How many tourists can we actually sustain in Sri Lanka without damaging our fragile ecosystems, our supply chain, our infrastructure? Would it be overloaded? Unfortunately, I think somewhere down the line we became obsessed with the numbers and the number of tourists, and we didn't really look at value or anything else. It was the overriding sort of goal of many different
Just
bodies.
getting people in, right?
Was generally just to get the people in.
So now, for example, as you said, year on year from 2015 there was, or 2008 there was growth. So in 2015 we had 1.7 million.
Yeah.
In 2016, 2 million.
Yeah.
In 2017, 2.1 million, and 2018, 2.3 million.
That's right.
Of course, then came Easter attack,
Yes.
COVID,
Yeah.
economic
Crisis.
free fall, the Aragala and all that. So now we've got to 2 million this last year.
Yes.
But as you correctly said, now there was one point where any person who came into Sri Lanka
Yeah.
was considered a tourist, and that was the number that was put out.
Yeah.
But if you take it as a contribution to the GDP, we are still lagging far behind what Maldives, India, Thailand, Malaysia have got as a contribution from tourism. Now you mentioned Allah
Yes.
and Kadu. So the amount of numbers that go in, but the yield that comes out, as you very correctly say, is very low. So what do you see is as a solution here? Like, is there a lag? Is this a precursor to more high-end tourists coming, or what is it?
So it's actually a very complicated question, and I'm sure an economist or
Yeah.
someone would be far better placed to comment, but I can comment from what I know working in the industry. And it's also a very sensitive question because if you look at Allah as a case study,
Yes.
there has been tremendous, well, the town has certainly grown, size-wise, and also it has provided employment to the local community, and a tourism economy has sprung up in Allah.
Yes.
Now, if you ask me, like currently, if Allah is considered a must-go-to destination to a lot of travelers, I would say yes, it is. But I would also guess that within the next few years, the demand of Allah will drop. That's because there has been unchecked development. Now, that also, it's symptomatic of the lack of proper regulation and planning when it comes to not only the tourism industry per se, but also in basic zoning in Sri Lanka, because that's the one thing that we lack is any proper regulation of building and development. So if you look at Allah town, the way it's been developed, I would say has sort of spoiled the town currently,
itself.
the town itself. And if this doesn't improve, that leads to lasting damage for the destination.
No, I completely agree with you, because now if you look at that town
Sure.
and the road, the reservation of the road, like there has to be some space left on either side. No, that is not there. Of course, what I'm also made to understand is a lot of politicians had invested some money there, and so this is a normal occurrence. It happens. It happened down south in Hikkaduwa when it took off. So these are things that we as a nation unfortunately have had to deal with moving forward. Now again, to take that Allah example, there are a couple of very high-end places in Allah, but they have also kind of divested into this more mass tourism sector kind of thin as well. And that is something, because whether we like it or not, social media has played such a huge role in getting Instagrammable locations, and people just go to those locations, take a picture, and they go off. Other than getting that exposure, are we actually seeing an income growth from that kind of tourism?
I don't think you can deny the fact that there is income growth. There is, and tourism as a contributory factor to something you said before. I think absolute numbers wise, we still can't compare ourselves with Thailand or the Maldives, because the absolute number of tourists that actually enter those countries is far higher still than it is to Sri Lanka. I think Thailand is over 25 million or some a huge figure.
Their income is astronomical in terms of like the USD, the amounts of billions that they are making. And we will come back to that. We will take another short break, and when we come back, we will discuss Sri Lanka's situation in the tourism sector in comparison to our regional competitors. Hi, welcome back. We were just discussing Sri Lanka's tourism sector in comparison to our regional competitors, be that Maldives, India, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, even Singapore as a tourist destination. So, Amrit, one of the things that Maldives, now Thailand, have in common is that they are tourist visa-free destinations. Now, I think Thailand, they anyway had huge numbers, but the moment they passed the law to make the arrival visa-free, their numbers just grew astronomically. Now, we can take that and look at what we did towards the latter part of last year, where we tried to impose restrictions. Now, what kind of effect did that have? Now, when the visa on arrival was reduced to whatever it was reduced to, what is that effect that you had on your arrivals and numbers?
I mean, I think it had a massive impact, especially. I mean, I can tell you that we had several cancellations because for a long time the whole visa issue was up in the air. We had no actual solution to it, and the system wasn't working. We had previously a system that worked. It had its shortcomings, but it worked fairly well, and there was no reason to change it at all. And it did have a sizable impact. It occurred, if you remember, sort of mid last year, and it's traditionally what's seen as the Sri Lankan, what we call the off season, which is essentially begins in May and then sort of runs till November, with July and August having sort of a summer peak because of school holidays in Europe and things like that. But a lot of the markets that perform in that season, for example, China, Southeast Asia, China, this sort of issue really puts off those travelers. And when they couldn't, there are also geopolitical issues actually, because actually what had happened was that the entire visa system was, as you know, run by I think an Indian company, a third party, and several Chinese travelers also. They weren't comfortable with information being shared to a third party. So there was that issue, and it did create a real disruption. I mean, some of our sort of what we were expecting last summer didn't materialize, and it was, very much to do with the visa issue.
Is it also like an absolute lack of awareness? Because now, I know traditionally we've tried to get these European tourists to come here, but that market has changed. It's a lot of Chinese tourists, it's a lot of Indian tourists. That market has changed, hasn't it?
I mean, it has changed remarkably. I think when you look at our traditional season, the winter season, what that means is European winter. But India has emerged as one of our strongest markets, both in the boutique sector and in resorts, and there's huge growth potential there. We're barely scratching the surface of the Indian market, and it's something that we should welcome. It's a very positive thing for I think for Sri Lankan tourism. It can it can really, I mean, the Indian market is varied, and it can really assist us in the future. And also, we need to look at new markets, and we need to diversify. We need to diversify so that we are a 365 days of the year tourism product, and not only sort of heavily reliant on one segment, which is our traditional Western European segment.
With rope walk, you've tried to do that. The bar that you've had, and now you had reciprocal bar in India, and you've tried to bring them here.
Sure.
Yeah. So has that been successful? Is that something you're looking to do?
Well,
and that Sri Lanka as a destination should look at.
Well, I think with rope walk, the story behind rope walk was that, I mean, it was actually just thought of. A lot of tourism products in Sri Lanka don't celebrate Sri Lanka. When you look at our F&B, food and beverage, even from most resorts you go to, if you go to a buffet, they might have a Sri Lankan section, but Sri Lankan food or drink, and in this case it's arak, isn't really celebrated. It was traditionally, I think we almost began to look down on it, because what we were concerned about is presenting sort of international cuisine, which yes, you must have, but the idea behind rope walk was to celebrate our own cuisine and food, and that's very much what it is. It's a specialty arak bar and a specialty Sri Lankan restaurant.
And that also leads me, because I feel now that there is more concentration on celebrating Sri Lanka and bringing out Sri Lankan products, Sri Lankan food, Sri Lankan fusion food, and pop-ups and all that sort of thing, and that is very much an exportable product.
Oh yeah, I think if you look at the next 5 years, I think you will see a tremendous growth in Sri Lankan cuisine globally. But if you look back at it, I mean, as tourism, you spoke about Thailand. What was the most successful sort of marketing tool that Thailand used is Thai food.
Thai street food.
Thai street food or Thai food. In lots of destinations, the food is easily marketable. And thankfully, I mean, Sri Lankan cuisine seems to be having this renaissance globally. So we should really utilize that to market our destination.
That's all we have for this week. But we will be continuing this conversation with Mr. Amrit Rajaratnam next week. So please do tune in, and we will continue to discuss tourism and understand what Sri Lanka can be if tourism is done properly. Thank you. We have the highest density of leopards in the world.
Simply, there's just no regulation of wildlife tourism in Sri Lanka.
There are resorts in Africa which charge about $3,000 a night per person.
Why is there overvisitation of Yara National Park?
The moment the tourism numbers pick up, the local tourists are cast aside.
Locals being discriminated against merely due to the fact that they are Sri Lanka.
You can take action against private entities.
You know, people are comparing Sri Lanka to Bali. I don't think we should compare Sri Lanka to Bali, because I think we're better.